Hello again, everyone. If you were in the welcome just now, you already have the wonderful introduction that Melissa gave to Simon. This is Simon Newman, and he is the CEO of the Online Dating and Discovery Association, ODDA. But today we're going to be having him talk about why trust and safety matters, building consumer confidence in online dating platforms. And in this session, you're going to hear about how trust and safety, the importance of it as we deal and engage with both customers, consumers, and online dating apps. They'll share some insights into regulation and the trends around the world that are driving change and what the sector is actually doing to address these risks and where the gaps are. So there's been major changes, and Simon is going to be here talking with us about them. And welcome so much, Simon. Thank you for being here with us today. And you can just take it away. I'm going to fade to black.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Aileen. And hello, everyone, and greetings from a rather dull and damp UK. So hopefully, if you're in the US, it's a little bit brighter and warmer there. So thank you for the introduction. Simon Newman, the CEO of the Online Dating and Discovery Association. So I'm just going to put some slides on screen and hopefully you'll be able to see those shortly. So Aileen, can you just tell me if can everyone see those okay? Does that look all right?
Yes, we can see them.
Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. So I'm just going to go through my slides with you now. And of course, please feel free to ask any questions. Just very briefly, a little bit about the ODDA. We are, if I can just go on to my next slide, there we go. On my camera. There we go. So we are effectively a trade body, a trade association for the online dating and social discovery sector. So online dating effectively is where people go online for romance, social discovery, where people go on perhaps for friendship, and the two work hand in hand together. We've been around as an association since 2013, originally just the ODA, so focusing just on online dating, and then expanded at the beginning of 2024 to include social discovery as well. And I joined back in June, so coming up to about 18 months in the role within ODDA. My background previously, spent a lot of time working in counter fraud, spent much of my career in government, both here in the UK and internationally as well, and certainly around digital policy and regulation, which is a real sort of area of interest. As a trade body, very similar to other organisations that work in that way, we represent around about 500 brands worldwide, including many of the well-known dating apps that you are no doubt familiar with. And our job really is engaging on their behalf with policymakers, regulators all around the world to try and make ultimately online dating as safe as we can for everyone. And I've put there as a bullet point the importance of trust and safety. It is absolutely crucial to what we do as an association and also to our members as well. And we'll be going through some of the things that we're trying to do to raise standards across the sector and ensure that, as it says there as our mission, to make sure everyone has an enjoyable, safe, responsible experience online. So I'm going to cover a few things today which I thought might be helpful to give you a sort of an overview of the things that we're doing. If you're unfamiliar with the online dating sector, I thought I'd just start off with a little slide that talks about its size. So globally, it's estimated to be worth around 5.2 billion US dollars. The US is by far the single largest market. The UK and Europe are catching up quite quickly, which is great. And of course, we're now starting to see emerging markets become more popular, particularly South America, as we're seeing a growth in smartphone use, but also Australasia. Asia as well is another growth market. So it's becoming a fairly popular marketplace and increasingly the place to meet people online, whether that's for romance or for friendship. Some statistics there, which I thought might be worth sort of adding into that. So on the left-hand side, you can see that in the US, as dating is very much mainstream there, around about 3 in 10 of the adult population have used an online dating app within the last 12 months. In the UK, it's around about 1 in 10. So there's obviously a big opportunity there to grow, and a very similar figure in Europe as well. So that gives you an indication of the size of the market. If you look to the top right-hand side, there's a little red line coming out of that market share, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later on in terms of some of the challenges challenges that we face. And of course, fake profiles and scammers and fraud is why we're here today, and talk about some of the things that are causing certainly our members some real concern in relation to those issues. So that's a little bit about the sector and who we are. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and the title is obviously around, kind of consumer behavior and building trust and confidence in what we do. There are a couple of really big drivers for change that are around at the moment, and these are very much on a global footing, not just here in the UK, but things you may be familiar with in different parts of the world as well. The first of those is around consumer behavior. Now, the little things there in green, I think, are really important. So we're seeing consumers changing the way that they want to engage with others online. So if we think about online dating really raising its prominence and becoming incredibly popular during the pandemic in the early part of this decade, obviously people weren't able to go out and meet each other in bars and clubs as perhaps they had done previously, so relied on the internet to make those connections. Over time, people are now looking at different things they want from online dating, so more authentic experiences, and we'll talk about some of the things that are happening as a result of that as well. We're also looking at changing demographics. So we've now got Gen Z, which is starting to use the internet more and more and wanting different things from dating apps than the generation that went before them. And of course, mainstream apps as well now also sit alongside what we might class as niche dating apps. And they serve everything from particular age groups to particular interests and are growing in popularity around the world. And that's been a real growth market that we've been seeing all around across different borders. On the right hand side, and that's a really interesting thing, particularly in relation to trust and safety. So one of the things that we're starting to see now is consumer behavior is starting to change the way apps look at how they embed trust and safety within their apps. So one of the things we'll talk a little bit later on is in relation to friction. And what we're starting to see now is that consumers are increasingly aware of things they want to see dating apps have in place as a way of protecting their identity, their safety, and their security. And it says there about, just under half of all those surveyed would like to see apps have something along the lines of identity verification in place. So we're seeing consumers starting to demand some changes as well. And many apps are already on top of that. Again, we'll talk about some of that a little later on. Now, the other key driver, of course, is our good friend legislation. This last 12 months or so has been pretty much unprecedented in terms of the amount of legislation that has been implemented. I'm going to focus primarily on the first two countries, the UK and Australia, but just briefly wanted to mention as well that we've had a lot of legislation being introduced across Europe, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and next year we'll be having the Digital Fairness Act as well. So again, some really strategic and big pieces of legislation which affect not just our sector, but pretty much anyone working within the digital economy. And of course, in the US, we've been very closely monitoring a really interesting piece of legislation there called the Romance Scam Prevention Bill. And that's really interesting from the perspective of how it tries to ensure that if anyone has been banned as a result of a fraud notification, then users that have engaged with that individual are now or are going to be required to be notified by the app that person has been on their platform. So we're starting to see some federal legislation emerge in the US, in addition to some state legislation as well, which is primarily focused around age assurance. So you can see a common theme around age assurance, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But let's go back to the Online Safety Act in the UK. And I just wanted to kind of just highlight some of the things that we're seeing there at the moment. So if anyone is unfamiliar with the Online Safety Act, it is a massive piece of legislation which came into effect back in 2023. And as it says there, really, it's about holding tech companies legally responsible for user safety. And it places a number of legal obligations on those companies to protect both children and adults from harmful and illegal content. Now, online dating services are what we describe as in scope of the Online Safety Act. That means they're covered by the law in the UK because they allow messaging between users on their platforms. But there's another factor as well that Ofcom, as the regulator in the UK for the Online Safety Act, says, and that's about who it covers. And effectively, even if the companies are based or headquartered outside of the UK, their services are still covered by the Online Safety Act if they've got users in this country. And as well being a target market or being accessed by people in this jurisdiction. So it's a big encompassing piece of legislation. I think it's fair to say that it's certainly very much as it's in its early days. Lots of work has gone on in terms of research, but also in terms of engaging and lots of proactive engagement with Ofcom, who've been looking at where there are areas to address, specific issues to pick up on. And again, we'll talk about some of those a little bit later on as well. So really big piece of legislation in the UK, probably slightly bolder than where Europe have gone so far, but lots and lots of discussions at the moment around how other countries are implementing similar legislation. So one to watch if you're not familiar with it, and lots of lessons learned that are coming out of that, which we think will be really interesting for the future. In terms of kind of a roadmap, and I thought I'd just share this with you. This is Ofcom's official Online Safety Act roadmap. What the roadmap does is it sets out the key dates for the Online Safety Act. So if you look at the top left, as I mentioned there, it was passed into UK legislation, UK law back in 2023. And since then, Ofcom have been consulting very widely on a range of codes of practice and guidance documents that in-scope services are required to follow. And those four red arrows there are the really important things that are affecting our sector, and things that we've been working on behalf of our members to engage with. So we've got illegal harms, first of all. So that's making sure things like child sex abuse material is proactively removed from platforms and other harmful and illegal content. There's also children's access assessment guidance. So as an association, we only allow members whose platforms are for over 18s only. And even if, and an example here is even if we've got a dating site that is specifically aimed at people over the age of 50, for example, and it's very, very unlikely that a child would be interested in going onto that site, Ofcom now require us to effectively prevent under 18s from being able to access that site in the first place. I'll come on to that in a minute about how we're doing it as well. There's also been a big push for protecting women and girls in particular, which is fantastic. Ofcom have recently just completed a consultation on some guidance, which we expect to be published in full later, probably early part of next year. And also, in addition to that, there are some additional consultations which Ofcom have recently launched around some additional safety measures that they're expecting platforms to put in place. So this is a really, really big piece of legislation, and lots of things coming out from the regulator. And I must say here have been absolutely fantastic, engaging with us and our members very proactively in helping us understand what these new obligations look like. Now, just one thing before we move on to the next slide. If an organisation was to ignore the Online Safety Act, then the fines that the regulator can impose are pretty significant. So 10% of worldwide revenue. They can also take a number of other actions against that platform as well. And we're already starting to see Ofcom take action against some pornography sites here in the UK as well. So those who have demonstrated complete non-compliance so far have already felt the wrath, if you like, of the regulator, who are beginning to issue fines and other measures against those companies. So something we are very focused on, and pretty much every digital organisation in the UK is also very focused on at the moment. So that's a bit about the roadmap. Now, I was talking earlier about age assurance, and I thought this is just something worth kind of covering off here as an area that is currently in the process of being implemented across our sector. So I mentioned there that the Online Safety Act requires in-scope services to implement highly effective age assurance. So that means we have to be able to prevent under 18s from accessing online dating sites. And the guidance that's produced by Ofcom is actually quite prescriptive. It gives some examples, it's a non-exhaustive list of the types of things that in its view is capable of being highly effective age assurance. So things like credit card checks, open banking, photo ID matching, facial age estimation, and so on and so on. And it says if you implement one of those things, then you need to make sure that whatever you use is technically accurate, that it's robust, it's reliable, and it's also fair. And this is designed to make sure that under 18s aren't accessing anything that is age inappropriate. So, as I said, Ofcom recently consulted on that. We fed back to that. This is now part of the final children's codes and guidance, which came into effect a few months ago. And many of our members either have already implemented highly effective age assurance or in the process of doing so. And this is part, and you'll see at the bottom there, I've put there what we call safety by design approach. So regulators in the UK are keen for platforms to take this approach where you're building everything with safety in mind. So that's kind of the structure that we are now trying to deliver across our member services. Now, the two things I put on that individual's head there are around friction and cost. And this is one of the challenges that we've got. So on the one hand, an absolute commitment to keep everyone as safe as we can while they're online. But equally, we're acutely aware of some of the challenges that that creates. So as we're bringing in new processes, arguably that creates friction. Friction, there is a concern that potentially that means users will drop off because they're not comfortable or prepared to go through that highly effective age assurance process. And there's also a cost element as well. 12 months ago, it was probably about 30-40 cents using US money to go through some form of highly effective age assurance. Move on to now, and it can be done for a fraction of a cent. So the costs are coming down all the time, which is brilliant, because not all online dating platforms will operate a subscription model. Some of them will use a model where it's free, but they will generate income through things like advertising revenue. So these are serious considerations that online platforms, including those in the dating sector, have to take very seriously as part of that process. And they're just two of the issues that we're talking to members about at the moment, but are part of that broader trust and safety piece about making sure that we prevent the wrong type of people getting onto these platforms. So that's in terms of the UK. I wanted to talk very briefly about Australia because this is something called the Online Dating Safety Code. It came into effect the 1st of October last year and is a really interesting non-legislative tool that was created by the eSafety Commissioner in Australia in partnership with a number of leading online dating companies. So effectively, it's a voluntary code of practice. And there are on the left hand side here a series of key or core components that the code requires those organizations to have in place. So things like harm detection and action. So implementing systems to detect online enabled harm. Fantastic. Transparent reporting. So making sure that users have the ability to be able to complain or report issues that they may find on that platform. Providing support for users, cooperating with law enforcement. Again, we'll talk a bit more about that later on, and producing transparency reports. And I'll show you in a moment two key slides from one of those signatory bodies on the transparency report they've recently published online. And then finally, there's a compliance rating as well. And this is designed to give the consumer confidence that the platform that they're using not only has those things in place, but is also transparent in what they're doing as well. I think we've got a question coming in. I'm happy to take a question. Aileen, is that all right to take a question now, or would you rather me to stay at the end?
It's really up to you, Simon. If you would like to take a question now, you certainly can.
Let's go for it. Go on, let's take a question.
All right. That is in the chat.
Is it in the chat? Let me have a look at the chat.
Let's see. Well, it's not in the chat. Usually we have people through the Q&A.
Someone put their hand up, so.
Oh, okay. Well, I just want to remind everyone, instead of putting your hand up, just put a question in the Q&A and then we will handle it usually at the end.
Fantastic. So whoever put their hand up, if you want to put that in the chat, please do, and I will make sure that we answer that as we get to the end of the presentation. But that's an example of what Australia have done. As I said, it's now literally been the first 12 months. This is something that we are interested in looking at the effectiveness of, and again may well serve as a model approach for other countries as well. And as I mentioned, the transparency reports are really crucial as a way of telling users in particular what these apps are doing to keep people safe online. And I'm just going to put this one up here. So this is from the Match Group. So the Match Group, probably the largest online dating firm that are out there and who own a number of very well-known dating apps that most of you will be familiar with. This, I think, is quite interesting in terms of this slide. So this here is about the total number of bans and suspensions, and it's a 12-month period. So the 1st of July last year to the 30th of June this year. And you can see in that 12-month period alone that there were 662,000 accounts that were banned by the Match Group in total. And above that figure, to the left-hand side, of course, are the reasons for those bans coming into effect. On the right-hand side, which I think is also really interesting there, it talks about those being banned proactively. So this is not based on a complaint. This is effectively where Match's processes, their systems, and the people involved in the trust and safety teams are being proactive and actually looking for or reacting to things that they're seeing, and therefore banning them proactively before they get to be a user complaint. So 85% are deactivated or tackled as a result of being proactive. So that's a really positive message to show the effectiveness of some of these processes in place. And I think just underlines, just how much goes on to ban and remove people who potentially are at risk of causing harm to others. So that's one particular area that I think is worth thinking. That bans. The other one is to do with content. There we go. And if you can see again, during the same period, again for the Match Group, over 500,000 pieces of content were removed in that period. So again, on the left-hand side, reasons or the types of things that are or policy, as they say, for reasons for that removal, and you can see that a huge number of content that's removed. And again, on the right-hand side, and we'll talk a bit about sort of the differences between AI and human moderation, that the Match Group relies very heavily on human moderation. So in effect, automatic deletion or removal only happened in just over 2.5% of those cases. So the transparency reports are out there. They're publicly available. Search it on Google. They make a really fascinating read. And all the signatory bodies that are part of that code within Australia are required to publish these every year. So they've just recently been published and give a fascinating insight to some of the things that the sector is doing to address those common concerns that we've spoken about. So that's the Australian dating code. Now, going back to legislation, and I just wanted to highlight two particular things which I thought would be really useful for people here to recognise. And this is what we call the unintended consequences. Now, I don't know, and I'm hoping you do have this game in America in an arcade called Whack-A-Mole. The concept behind it, of course, is that you put your money in, one of the moles pops up, you've got your hammer there, you try and hammer the mole down before the next mole starts popping up. And policymaking can often be like this. Age assurance is a great example of where we've had a bit of a whack-a-mole situation. So as we're looking at tackling things at the front end, i.e. we are trying to reduce fraudulent accounts, we're trying to stop underage people joining dating apps, what we're finding is bad actors are now looking at other ways of getting into dating apps. And they're trying to exploit, if you like, the back door. So they're exploiting things like weak password security. So where perhaps a user uses the same password for a number of different accounts. Maybe they've used a very weak password. And so effectively they're taking over that individual's accounts and getting in on the dating app that way. And again, we're starting to see a trend of that happening. So we're working with our members to look at password security to ensure that users are aware of making sure they follow correct processes in terms of passwords as well. So that's one area that we've seen as a real risk. The second one is quite fascinating. As we're starting to look at age assurance and we're seeing many providers enter the marketplace, criminals have also seen that as a great opportunity to mirror that. And effectively, we've started to see some fake adverts appearing on Google where you've got criminals pretending to be age assurance providers. And of course, people being duped by that and therefore passing over valuable information to fraudsters who can then go on and use that for fraud. Now, we've raised this with regulators in the UK, but this is a common problem internationally. We know the FBI raised a concern around this at the beginning of last year as well. So whack-a-mole in terms of you solve one problem, but arguably you create another problem. And sometimes that problem can be even worse than the problem you're trying to solve. We've also seen another issue. Now, those of you who watched the news recently, so this is a BBC news item here in the UK, but Discord, very well-known online platform, announced recently that they had around 70,000 users could have had their ID photos breached as a result of an interesting attack. Now, this was fascinating because Discord had implemented highly affected age assurance. They'd outsourced that to a third-party provider, very reputable third-party provider. But those who'd failed that process, now that could be, for example, is that if they've been using facial estimation, perhaps the individual was 19 years old and the algorithm said, well, could be 18, could be 19, could be 16. What we would need is a follow-up, and the person needs to then submit some personal ID to be able to prove it. What happened is that anyone who failed that verification was redirected to their service desk. That service desk was outsourced to another third party. And of course, the service desk was the one that was compromised. So not Discord, not the age verification provider, but in fact, it was actually the service desk themselves. And approximately 70,000 records were then taken. Now, the 2 bullet points there for me are those real important lessons and something we've been sharing with the sector to be aware of. The first one is making sure you've got the right processes in place, particularly when you're using third parties. So what processes do they have, and security measures to protect the data they're managing on your behalf. So for example, as an age verification provider, they should not be storing that data. Once the verification has been completed, that data should be deleted. Secondly, you've also got to try and predict consumer behavior, because we also found in that case, or we were looking into the detail behind it, and that we were working out that consumers effectively were sending their ID just to a random email address at Discord rather than going through the age verification process. So you've got to think about the systems, the processes, the policies in place to protect all parts of your system from potential vulnerabilities. So again, that's a really interesting one. And the impact of that is having a potential consequence on confidence by consumers. So something really crucial and one to be very aware of. So what are we doing to kind of improve confidence and embedding that trust and safety across our platforms? So I've put this little graph up here, which I hope, or this little diagram, which I hope explains the sort of multi-layered approach that our sector is now taking. So on the left-hand side, we've got a consumer who has made a decision to go on an online dating app. Fantastic. And there are perhaps a few things that they will want to consider before choosing the app. So how seriously does the app take my data in terms of its security, perhaps its privacy? What trust and safety measures do they have? There may be other considerations. How much is it going to cost? What features does the app have? Is there much friction to become a member? And what about relevance in terms of people that I meet that perhaps suit the profile that I am? And so on the right hand side, what I've defined there is what we class as the 3 stages of online dating. So we've got the onboarding process. So within the onboarding process, as we mentioned, we've got that first gate, age assurance. So you've got to get through that first of all. Increasingly, we're starting to see some apps now roll out things like identity verification. So more and more now to identify you are who you say you are, as well as the fact you're over 18. We're also now starting to see more in the way of scam detection. So being able to identify and then block from becoming users, those users that are clearly fake or using internet protocol IP addresses, which are from high-risk countries. And also we've got policies, procedures and standards. So for example, prohibiting people who have criminal convictions in certain areas. So once we've gone through that onboarding process, we then go onto the app for real. And these are an example of a few things that our members have in place to keep people safe online. So the first thing is about giving users control. That means about deciding how much information they want to share with others, allowing them to decide how they contact you, in what way, in what formats, and giving them complete control over that user journey. And that's a really crucial part of trust and safety. It's about not just the measures the app puts in place, but ensuring the user feels they're in control of their destination as well. As I mentioned, we've got content moderation. That includes both AI, technological content moderation, that's picking up things like inappropriate images, even language. It's incredibly effective these days, but also human moderation, as we saw with the Match Group's transparency reports. We've got guides, we've got awareness campaigns, things like what to look out for in terms of romance scams. That's updated regularly as criminals shift their approaches and their tactics. Then there's support on offer, human support in terms of advice and help, but also reporting. So if anyone feels uncomfortable, there's the ability to be able to flag that to an individual on the other end of the connection. And finally, as well, access to perhaps more specialist support and help as well, which again is becoming increasingly commonplace across our apps. And then finally, once that person hopefully then meets someone that they want to go and take further and see them in real life, IRL to use a TLA or three-letter abbreviation, we've then also got our apps having a responsibility to make sure that that engagement is as safe as it can be as well. So as well as specialist help and support, there's also guides about where to meet, how to meet. And we're also seeing as well, many of our members start to look at more of a hybrid approach. So they're providing schemes where there's perhaps double dating or even running events, so online and offline events where people can get to know one another in real life. So in effect, that's a multi-layered approach that we're seeing from many dating apps that embeds trust and safety very much as part of that safety by design approach. And underpinning that are two core things. One is a set of standards, which is what the ODDA is involved in terms of writing those standards to set out what good looks like, but also partnerships with law enforcement, and I'll come on to that in a minute, partnerships with specialist organisations, with charities, voluntary organisations, non-governmental department bodies, and so on and so on. So it's those multi-layer approaches which are designed to keep people as safe as possible. They're adaptable, they're changing as things change and circumstances move on. So that's part of what we're doing as a way of tackling some of those issues that we are sadly very commonplace with. A few other things that we're doing as well, I thought I'd just add in two things in particular. Again, this is a UK sort of situation, but again, might be just worth sharing with you. So if we look at the US, for example, access to criminal records data is relatively straightforward. And I know I use that term quite loosely. In the UK, it is incredibly restricted. So one of the challenges is that we don't know who is on our dating apps in terms of their criminal records history. So we can make a policy there that we don't want criminals with perhaps serious violence or sexual offending, but we don't have the data from government or law enforcement to tell us who has those convictions. So a few years ago, a law came into effect called Clare's Law, and this is effectively now known as the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme. This means that if anyone is unsure about a partner and wants to find out whether they have a history of violence or sexual offending, then effectively people have the right to ask and the right to know. And it's ultimately up to the local police forces then to determine what information to share with the individual themselves. Now, you can't currently use that for online dating users. We've made a recommendation to the UK government that it's expanded and it should be available to people online, because effectively you're meeting partners. This is the way we now engage with people, and so it should be expanded. We've not had a particularly positive response so far from government, but we'll continue to push that because we think this is really important, and it's something that our members are also very keen on doing. So that's just one example of things that we're trying to put pressure on to make online dating safer. The other thing is really interesting. And this is about how we manage offenders. So to give you an example, if someone is convicted of a criminal offence in the UK and they are sent to prison, when they are released from prison, they are subject to what we call licensing conditions. And the law in the UK sets out a document which has two bits. There are what we call standard conditions. That means they're mandatory. So that might mean that you're not allowed to go back to where you lived previously, or if you've been convicted of a robbery, not to go into a particular bank or a shop. Or alternatively, there are what we call optional conditions. Now, one of the optional conditions as it currently stands is not to use an app or a website. We've asked ministers in the UK to make it mandatory that they are not allowed. So if you've been convicted of a violent or a serious sexual offence, you should not be allowed to use an online dating app. And that is either monitored through technology, so technology being installed on their computers, their telephones, for example, or managed by what we call the probation service, so parole officers, to use a US equivalent. And again, we're working with the UK government to look at whether we can implement that across the country. So that's another thing, again, about trying to keep people safe. Great for UK offenders, becomes a bit more problematic when we've got offenders who've committed crimes and been convicted in courts overseas. Couple of other things we're doing, and I just, again, as we come towards the end of my session here, I just wanted to talk about fraud. I'm not going into great detail about the fraud problem. We're all familiar with how much of an issue it is. It's interesting in the sense that continues to grow. The data we've now got in the UK, it's 103 million UK pounds were lost in the past year, over a billion according to the US, and it is a huge issue for any online platform. We're seeing particular growth in social media, so we've got a lower problem now in online dating, which is great, but it is still becoming a major issue. Some of the things we're doing at the moment, we've been putting a pilot together, working with a third party called Scamalytics. There's a little washing machine there. What we're doing is effectively risk assessing the IP addresses of users. We're scoring those IP addresses, and those that we can confirm are fraudsters, we're sharing that information free of charge with our members, who can then wash that against their own data, and we can spot who are fraudsters. We can also spot how long it takes for a fraudster to try and get from one app to another app. And we're feeding that data now back to law enforcement as well. So really useful exercise that's helped us understand the scale and the nature of the problem, and something that's really helping us block bad actors from getting in the first place. And that's been hugely successful. One of the other things that we're starting to look at as well, we are looking at doing a fraud report next year on behalf of the ODDA, a big call for action with recommendations for government and for platforms in particular. We're about to launch a new pilot with UK law enforcement. I can't talk too much about it, but what it will mean is that we will have access to WhatsApp numbers, images, we'll have email addresses and other data, which will then help us understand who are the bad guys on these dating platforms, so that we can remove them and block them across all platforms. We'll also be providing law enforcement with a great opportunity to identify opportunities for intervention. So that means they can provide victim support, or they can provide other awareness or prevention advice as a way of preventing people, hopefully, from becoming victims in the future. We've got an academy we're working on in the ODDA as well about professionalising the sector, particularly around trust and safety, which we're hoping to launch in 2026. And we're also looking at the work that the Australians done, as I mentioned earlier, and whether we can replicate it in the UK as a way of seeing some of the companies as a trust mark to give some reassurance to users about measures that they've got in place to keep their users safe. And then finally for me, things that we want, the gaps, if you like. So information sharing is a really big issue. Something I get very frustrated about is the fact that we've got data, the financial services sector has data, lots of different sector all has data, but we're not particularly good at getting together, either across sectors or at an international level. And we need government to pull some levers to make that data available free of charge, so that it benefits some of those smaller platforms that are out there. So again, we've been calling on governments around the world to do more to exercise its powers, that it can hopefully make a difference. We've also sought powers from government to prevent fraudulent IP addresses from actually reaching the UK. So what else can we do to tackle that? We want to talk about opportunities for intervention, as I mentioned. Engaging with users, we now work with victims groups. I regularly speak to victims groups to understand their experiences, feed that back to our members about how we can improve our platforms and the service we provide. And equally, we need to celebrate success as well. We are making a difference. We're starting to do well, and it's important that we continue to make those noises. That's been me. Thank you very much, Melissa, for a wonderful opportunity to speak to everyone today. Happy to take questions if we've got time. I've probably gone over, but thank you once again.
Simon, you're a legend in the space. Thank you. I love the whole of society approach. I love everything that your organization is doing. There's some questions. We're going to host the Q&A. The engagement has been phenomenal, as I knew it would be. Let's kick it off. Paul earlier this morning asked this question. It's a two-part question. I'm going to read it as one because it makes sense. Are all dating sites in scope, even if you can only chat and cannot share content, or if adult content cannot be shared? Then the second part to that is, how about in the case of dating sites where you can only chat with AI bots? There's no humans at all, only AI bots. Simon.
Good question. So my general view is we suggest to dating apps that they consider themselves in scope. Now, obviously, in those particular situations, I would personally pick up the phone, drop an email to Ofcom, and just ask them that question. They are very, very engaging and will give really helpful advice and support. So, treat yourself, make the assumption that you are in scope. What you've just described there doesn't sound particularly onerous from a regulatory perspective. The risk seems to be very, very low, but just to confirm with Ofcom to be sure, and then you might find that you're able to move away from some of those things. So hopefully that helps.
Excellent. I have another question in here. Do you see any examples of dating platforms that are doing it extraordinarily well? Who else is crushing it?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of really good practice out there, and it's not always necessarily some of the bigger organizations. So we're seeing lots of the smaller ones doing things as well. I think the ones that are really doing well are the ones that are engaging very closely with their users. They're looking at partnerships. They're taking that safety by design approach. So there's lots and lots of really good practice, and as well as Ofcom wanting to collate what good practice looks like, we also want to try and do that as well and share that as a way of saying, here's what good looks like, and hopefully others will do that. But everyone's doing things differently, which is really good. And I think that's the nice thing about regulation. It actually can be a driver for really good innovation too.
Are you seeing any, I'm going to go off script and ask my own question. Are you seeing any concerns out in the market where the larger players that have a bigger purse are able to be much more effective than the smaller ones? And is this going to be an inhibitor to trust and safety and competition?
No, I don't think so. And I think the nice thing about the regulation is it's what we would describe as a risk-based approach. Now, clearly the larger platforms, just because they are larger, will have more in the way of risk, and therefore the regulatory compliance requirements for them are going to be significantly greater, perhaps to some of the smaller platforms, and that's really how it's designed to work. I think you're quite right. Things like content moderation for a large platform will implement undoubtedly AI and a whole team of trust and safety specialists who can support that. For small platforms, and bear in mind our smallest member is just one member of staff, they haven't got the budget or the capability of doing all that, but they will manage that risk in a way that they think is appropriate. And as long as it satisfies Ofcom, then it works as well. So I don't think it necessarily matters whether you're a big platform or a small platform. The thing is to recognize and identify where those risks are and mitigate them in the way that you think is most appropriate.
Outstanding. What do you see the opportunities for the monitoring of the platform? Is it more leaning into an AI space with the advent and the accessibility of AI, or is it always going to have that human in the middle? What are your thoughts on that?
So it's a really interesting question. I think both have a role to play and will do for a number of years. I mean, AI is great in some regards because it's able to spot things that the human, may not be able to. We know that deep fakes are getting incredibly sophisticated now, and most humans will find it difficult to spot the difference between that and a real profile. So it will have its place, but I think the human element is equally just as important. And I think it was quite telling that Match Group have invested very heavily in that, as have other dating apps as well. And if we talk about that more authentic experience, online dating users don't just always want to have engagement with a computer or AI. They want to actually speak to a human if they're concerned. So, I think both of them will work hand in hand. I think it'll be peaks and troughs. We'll see advances in technology, which means that trust and safety teams may shrink from time to time, but then 6 months later, they're likely to expand again, and we'll see some changes. But I definitely see a future for both going forward.
Outstanding. I'll close with this statement. Simon and I met probably about a year ago now because Simon's organization was in line with the way that I think the payments industry needs to be thinking about dating ecosystems, adult ecosystems. These are legitimate ecosystems that present awesome opportunities, but carry an awesome risk. And when you do it well, it's incredible for everybody and it works. Simon, thank you, my friend. Be safe.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.